Hello, everybody. This is Hyana Park from SPIPON Partners. Welcome to webinar 44 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by Federal Highways and AASHTO. Today, we'll be focusing on agencies' integration of the Transportation Asset Management Plan, better known as TAMP, with the State Transportation Improvement Program, better known as STIP. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. In our last webinar, we addressed geotechnical assets and transportation asset management. It was a great session, and I encourage you to look it up on the AASHTO TAM portal. There you'll find more information on this webinar series. Just visit TAM-portal.com and click TAM Events in the main menu. You can also register for upcoming webinars as they're announced, and you'll find archives of all of the previous webinars. Links to the video and slides from today's webinar will be posted on this site, and the slides are already posted in the menu bar on the GoToMeeting site today. If you have suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature. We'll answer the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar in the order they're asked. We look forward to your questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Gay of Federal Highways for a welcome and intro on behalf of our co-sponsor, Federal Highway Administration. Steve.
Thank you, Yana. The Federal Highway Administration, in cooperation with AASHTO, is very pleased to sponsor this valuable webinar series. This series is first and foremost an opportunity to share practical, useful, timely information with the asset management community. So we're particularly happy to see so many of you joining us for our 44th webinar today. Today we're taking a look at TAMP and STIP integration. This is an important topic, and I say that as states are packaging the documentation to demonstrate implementation of the TAMP as part of this year's TAM consistency determination. How well were they all linked? Were they TAMP, STIP well integrated? How can this be improved? And how can you improve it in your state DOT or your organization? I'll also ask, have the state DOT planners and the respective MPOs and local entities read your state DOT TAMP? I'd recommend it. Is everyone on board with the objectives highlighted in the TAMP, the state of good repair, etc.? Does everyone understand the life cycle planning approach and investment strategies? What about the TPM short-term targets for pavements and bridges and the long-term goals? What about risk, dealing with extreme weather, sea level issues, funding shortfalls? Asset management, TPM, and performance-based planning all need to work together for managing the NHS for the long term. I think you're going to enjoy today's presentations, and I hope you all learn a lot this afternoon. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from our state DOT presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Yana of SPIPON Partners to share our agenda and objectives for today's webinar. Yana?
Thanks, Steve. Now, as Steve mentioned previously, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to transportation asset management plans and state transportation improvement programs, beginning to apply this knowledge in the context of TAMP and STIP integration in order to answer the following questions. What approaches are agencies taking to coordinate the TAMP and the STIP? What benefits can my agency expect by better integrating the TAMP and STIP development processes? How do we leverage the STIP to be able to deliver the performance projections in the TAMP? What are some of the key lessons learned for agencies as they move toward greater TAMP and STIP integration? And of course, again, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. For the agenda today, Harlan Miller will kick off the webinar and share with us Federal Highway's perspective on coordinating the TAMP and the STIP. Following Harlan's introduction, Tim McDowell of Wyoming DOT will kick off our state DOT presentations. After Tim, we'll hear from Jenny Lee from Texas DOT. Next, William Johnson of Colorado DOT. Then we'll learn from Dave Gardner on the Ohio DOT approach, and James Ashman of Michigan DOT will finish our series of presentations. Just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using the Q&A feature on the webinar control panel anytime during today's presentations. And again, we are videotaping the presentation, and you can download the slides on the webinar control panel. It'll also be available on the TAM portal. Now let's get started with an introduction from Harlan Miller of Federal Highway's Office of Planning.
Thank you, Hannah. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Harlan Miller. I'm in the planning office of Federal Highway's headquarters office. And over the last several years, Steve Gay, who you just heard from, and I have been working together on a series of rulemakings. Back in 2016, we have the Transportation Planning Rule, Federal Highway /FTA Planning Rule come out. Not shortly after that, the Asset Management Rule came out, and both of those were heavily coordinated, and Steve and I worked together. As Hannah mentioned, we want to stress the linkages between asset management and the asset management plans and the transportation planning process, and the importance of integrating the TAMP into the planning documents, such as the long-range statewide transportation plan, which is a 20-year plan, but especially the STIP, the statewide transportation improvement program, which is the 4-year program of projects that the states put together. And some people might ask, well, what does that integration mean? And well, integrating the TAMP into the STIP means that the goals and objectives for system performance that come out of the TAMP go into the long-range plan of the state and also into the STIP. Also performance measures, performance targets, investment strategies, the investment plan from the TAMP, and then all of that is leading to projects that get implemented into the STIP. So in a way, the planning process is where the TAMP is actualized into specific projects that get funded and then implemented to maintain a state of good repair for highways and bridges. We want to strongly encourage that you coordinate across disciplines. Oftentimes the folks that work on the TAMP are not necessarily the same people that work in the planning office of the state, so it's very important that that communication be ongoing, and that if you're the TAMP coordinator, that you encourage your planning staff in the state DOT to read and become familiar with the TAMP, and that they understand the relationships between the TAMP and the targets, performance targets, and management of state of good repair in the national highway system. State DOTs are required annually to demonstrate that they have followed and implemented the investment plan, the investment strategies in the TAM. And how do they do that? Well, they demonstrate that it's leading to projects that are in the STIP. There should be a direct connection between the TAMP and the projects that get funded in the STIP to carry out the TAMP. We also encourage coordination with the MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations in the state, on the TAMP. Similarly, the targets and performance measures and strategies and investment needs are shared with the MPOs, so that as they develop their long-range plans and their TIPs for the metropolitan regions, that they also reflect the outcomes of the TAMP. Lastly, I wanted to mention that on the planning side, the planners, as they put their STIP together, they also have to include a narrative in the STIP document that describes how the program of projects in the STIP helps achieve performance targets that are set. And a big part of that analysis should be a description of how the TAMP is being actualized and implemented through the STIP. With that, that's the overview I had. I'll turn it back to Hannah Park.
Thanks, Harlan. For our next presentation, we'll hear from Tim McDowell. Tim has over 40-year career with Wyoming DOT. For the past 25 years, Tim has been the state programming engineer in charge of the STIP. And in the last 5 years, the TAMP and the performance of the TAMP has been incorporated into the programming section of planning and is now under Tim's supervision. So take it away, Tim.
Great, thank you, Juana. Just appreciate everything you guys have done. We're going to be sharing Wyoming's experiences in integrating the TAMP and the STIP, and I want to stress it's our experiences, what we have learned, and we are still learning. It isn't instant. That's one of the things I want to really key up to everybody. It does not happen overnight, so don't become discouraged. It takes time to get the wrinkles out. And for some of us that's been around for quite a while, it may take industrial strength oil of Olay to get rid of the wrinkles. But it's important to note that it does take time. There are many number one priorities that are happening in each state, each region, each district. In Wyoming, our experience is Wyoming, the district engineers are responsible for the construction budget in their districts. They have given let's call it a pot of money, and they are responsible for achieving the targets that the pavement management system, bridge management, safety, and all the other things that they have to deal with. There's a lot of people that are involved in setting up the construction program, or the STIP, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of different priorities pulling on the districts. There's mobility issues, access issues, environmental, congestion, safety, livability, etc. Political, if you want to put that in there. And it requires working with the public and the elected officials, MPOs, to come up with a STIP that addresses all the needs, including the management system needs that address the performance targets that are out there. The feedback loops are very, very important. And that's one thing I want to stress. We have put that into Wyoming a long time ago. But basically is, for example, if the districts, they're driving the roads all the time, they may find an area that needs work. And so we got to be able to have that feedback loop into it. Also from the public, the system and the processes you put in place must be built to give quick feedback, especially if the STIP doesn't show that it's affecting the performance required, and you got to have that feedback. You may have items in there that, for example, legacy projects. You may have political projects you got to fit in there, and you've got to be able to move your priorities around. Recognize it may take upwards of 4 or 5 years once you implement this TAMP performance process to clear that budget of those older, worst first projects, as well as you've got to change the culture of your organization. My boss and I were just talking about that this morning, about currently in our STIP, we probably have 85% or more of our projects that are based on our management systems, asset management. 7 years ago, we could not have said that. Sometimes this process is like herding cats, thus the cartoon there. You've got to do that. One of the key things as you're setting this up, and what we had to learn, is take a look into the future. What do you need into the future, and set up for it now. It may be more costly and hard to set up your programs, your databases, but it pays off in the long run. The key in all of this that we had to learn, and we've been at this for a long time, and we learned from other states. We learned from some big states like Colorado, Utah, Minnesota, is you have to tie to performance, not an output indicator. For example, hey, how many tons of asphalt did we put down? So what did that give you? It has to be the outcome. The outcome is preserving with minimum life cycle cost. And we do life cycle planning in everything we do. It's not just the dollars spent in overlays. What did you get out of it? For example, in Wyoming, we have what we call 1S, 2S, 3S treatments in our pavement. That could translate as light, medium, and heavy treatments done at the right time based on PMS for pavement. For bridges, it's square feet of bridges based on repair type done at the right time. That could be preservation, repair, minor rehab, rehab. There's a lot more in bridge. I'm not sure why, but there's a lot more in bridge. And embedded in the STIP software, for example, that last bullet, think holistic. Our STIP software, we actually record in every single project the asset categories. And we break it down into the 1S, 2S, 3S treatment. How many miles did that actually achieve? The same with bridge. We're about to roll out safety and the treatment types there. That way we can slice and dice, if you want to call it that way, different queries. How are we doing? Are we achieving the targets, even in a plan such as a STIP? It's a plan. And are we achieving the targets? Are we getting our roads better into a more best case scenario, optimum performance? What we do is we track over time. If you're tracking for the moment, you're always going to miss the mark. And it'd be like day traders in the stock market. And any good stock market person will tell you it takes time over the future. And so what we do, what you see is an example of what we pulled out of our STIP database on a per project, rolled it up, and one of our districts, for example, this is their pavement miles based on a candidate list, and they have to achieve those targets of miles of work performed in each of those categories in order to have an optimized condition on the road. Down at the bottom, you see the bridge deck in NH, NHS, or interstate, NHS, not NHS, etc. It's just an example. It's just a point in time, but one of the things that we learned is we have a 6-year rolling average. Our STIP is 6 years, so we do it over a 6-year rolling average. Some years you may be high, some you may be low. You may have a political project. So you've got to count for that over a 6-year period or a time period horizon. One of the key things that we got to note here is what we've done since we've integrated this is we're using this to feed our annual consistency review. Our consistency review is currently being reviewed by FHWA for this year. We pull this data directly out of our STIP. We also use it to review our TAMP and do an analysis on that. Is it on course? We do a STIP analysis. Are we following our investment strategies? We're also using this for internal end-of-year reports and to really tie to performance management. That is some of the benefits we've been getting because we set it up in our database from the very beginning. And from the very beginning, you have to understand what are the requirements for the STIP. Wyoming is fortunate in that the STIP and the TAMP are under one manager, me. So it is very integrated. And they don't rely on my memory. It's put in a database. At my age, the memory is tough, so that's why you have to have it in the database. Projects can be grouped by function, by work type, or geographic area. And what we do in Wyoming is we utilize this capability to, in the future, set up placeholder areas where we acknowledge the dollars that are going to be applied, but sometimes the locations are not quite set. And then as they're finalized by the route or whatever, we're able to put that in our database. Remember that the STIP is for us, we're tracking all the performance measures. So you got to think about how the TAM assists the process. The TAM process is critical to help the STIP achieve its requirements and the performance measures. That's what you got to have all the way through here. The other thing is you got to set up a feedback loop in your process. We learned this from a lot of other states, including Colorado. The data must be aligned to allow for proper analysis, either by your district, by your road type, interstate, non-interstate, NHS, NHS, non-NHS, etc. by your treatment type. Somewhere in your databases, you've got to have that so you can check your performance. We have to support by district, the classification of the road. And for example, there were several years we were doing well statewide, but our analysis showed that there were some districts that were putting too much work in improvements and not preservation. And other districts were actually putting in more preservation and actually helping the lower performing districts. That analysis was able to be shown to our executive staff. This year, for example, they required one of the districts, they pushed out a lot of their improvement projects, pulled them back and made them hit their performance targets. That's the power of being able to integrate this together. You have to be able to continuously refine your management systems as well as your forecasting. Districts on the ground may be seeing different distresses, and so the experts need to be able to get out there on site, evaluate what's there. This can make some changes. You may end up changing the candidate list or the level of work, or you may even refine the management model. That's okay. It's an iterative cycle. It feeds back so that you can improve all the time. We're constantly improving and constantly learning. Timely reporting is critical. In Wyoming, there's only a few weeks from when the draft STIP is set to when it gets approved to move forward for public review. If the STIP does not meet the miles or the square feet, it must be brought up immediately. That's a lesson we learned a long time ago, and it has paid dividends to have the integration in there. We are not experts at everything, and we are learning constantly. But we feel for Wyoming, it has worked well to integrate and put it in our databases and have basically a one-stop shop, sort of, that helps us find out how are we doing on a moment's notice. As of today, we're even trying to improve that even more. And so hopefully we'll learn from our other states. And with that, we're going to pass it on.
Thanks, Tim. We'll now hear from Jenny Lee from Texas DOT. Jenny has been working in the field of pavement engineering for the last 15 years. Jenny started her career with TxDOT as an engineering assistant with the construction division in April 2007, and she also became a registered engineer in the same year. She's currently the section director of the Pavement Asset Management section, overseeing pavement management, pavement data collection, pavement design and analysis, and TAMP support. Jenny holds a PhD degree in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. And now I'll hand it over to Jenny.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to share with you Texas experience. In the next 10 minutes, I will cover the full part. I will give you a quick overview of Texas DOT, and then move on to the planning process. And then I will dive deeper to our 4-year payment planning process and summarize of the benefit of the integration. This is a quick overview of Texas DOT. Texas is the second largest state in terms of population. Texas DOT has 25 districts, 254 counties, and 25 MPOs. TxDOT is responsible for maintaining 196,000 land miles and 54,000 bridges. We, like all other state DOTs, we developed a risk-based asset management plan, and we stated our objectives and performance measures and set up our performance target for the interstate and non-interstate, and we went through the life cycle planning process in our TAMP. We submit our consistency check document last year. We're working on put together our consistent check document for this year. We are on track to submit our consistent check document to feds before the deadline of July 1st. This is a slide showing our planning process we document in our TAMP. You can see on the left, we have our asset management objectives. Objectives cover congestion, mobility, safety, preservation, connectivity. Under the objective, we have a long-range plan, which is 24 years, and 10-year UTP, and the 4-year STIP. You can see for the long-range plan, we bring all the state and locals, regional, and all stakeholders together to reach a consistency regarding our long-term needed transportation project and services. And then those projects, some of them move to this 10-year UTP process. Those get developed in 10 years. And for the last 4 years, the project goes to the STIP. The STIP includes a project that will be led in the next 4 years. So we have integrated process, but I want to share with you for TxDOT, we are a decentralized state. We have 25 districts. They are responsible for managing their own network. For payment-related project, and district is responsible for selecting their own project using the payment management system and other analysis tools, and then boots on the ground approach and based on the money allocated to their district. For the mobility connectivity project, district work with locals and POs to come up with a prioritized project list. The lists are submitted to our planning division. Planning division compile those project lists together and then evaluate project based on system priorities, system needs, and also predicted project performance, which satisfy the statewide objectives. You can see the whole process. We consider the identified project specific data that align a project performance benefit with the statewide objective is very critical. So in our TAMP, we did identify the risks which impact the whole planning process, like funding, programming decisions, lack of maintenance, emphasize extreme weather, and the staff turnover. I have only 10 minutes to discuss of this. We do have a lot of good things going on in our planning phase. My background is mainly on the payment side. I will share with you what we do here to select the payment project which aligns with our STIP and also our TAMP. The process is called 4-year payment management plan. The project selected from this plan fits into our STIP. Follows exactly the same timeline. Every district is required to develop a comprehensive payment plan for all payment-related activities. More importantly, this plan is financially constrained for the future 4 years. The plan covers all the routine maintenance, preservation, light, medium, and heavy rehab. This plan is reviewed annually by a committee established by TxDOT administration to ensure that maximized maintenance resources are directed towards payment operation and the roadway-related work. During these review meetings, the district's performance trend is reviewed, the plan is reviewed, and also feedback is given to the district. We just finished this year's 4-year plan review meetings. This is the first year we actually had a meeting online. It all went well. I borrowed one slide from our Corpus Christi district to show you the general timeline. You can see our STIP get finalized, approved by our Transportation Commission in August. But the work to put together the plan started way before August. The normal timeline starts in September and October. The project which impact the payment are identified, starting with the connectivity mobility project, and also includes rehab project, preservation project, and also routine maintenance project. From September all the way to December, districts are gathering all the information related to those projects and then compile data together. In January, that's the time we issue our new payment data, and that data are used with other data together for this planning process. So by March, somewhere between March and May, the plan is finalized and put into the system. The first 2 weeks of June is our review time. Every district is required to travel to Austin, present their plan. And they have end of June to finalize their plan. And July is the time they go out to do a public hearing. And then August is the time we finalize our plan and finalize our STIP. Two things I want to share in this process, which the process we have is data-driven and the boots on the ground approach. When we talk about the data-driven, we know we have 25 districts. Every district could have their own ways to pick and choose the project. But regardless what way they use, and they do need to use all the data available for them. In the process, they do use payment data, the last year's 4-year plan, they put it together, surface age data, scale data, payment condition forecast, run different payment analysis scenarios. They do consider crash heat maps, wide surface crash report, all kind of safety related features, and traffic, rural, urban, and the funding constraints. They use a different analytical tool to come up with their project list and rank their projects. Some of them use Excel spreadsheet, others use payment analyst, others use decision lanes to make decisions. But regardless, payment management system is used as a hub to bring all the data together and that help a district make decisions. And another important piece in the process is what we call boots on the ground. We all know data are data. Data will not cover every aspect of the project. So what we required is all the district need to have a boot on the ground team. They normally go out and rent a 15 passenger vehicles. They'll bring all the directors from maintenance, operations, planning, and air engineers, maintenance supervisors, payment engineer, design engineer, and even maintenance administrators into the van. Sometimes they have engineer in training included in the van, so that way they expose those engineers to this experience. So during this van ride, they will visit all the project sites, and then they will take notes and then discuss about project scopes, anything need to be rescoped or added or removed, or the project moved to the future years. This serves as a great opportunities to bust the silos of the different offices and bring everybody to the same page. This is very important communication tools that serves really well in the project decision process. Another important thing I want to emphasize is here, that's culture change. Safety is very important to TxDOT. We had important culture change towards the safety. So for now, all the safety is incorporated in our projects. For example, for the hot mix asphalt project, the rumble strip is included to all projects. Profile marking are included in all Silco surface projects. In the past, it used to happen, there were discussions between planning and the maintenance whether, and even the traffic office, whether those safety, system safety related features need to be included in the project or not. And now everybody on the same page, and those will be, are included in the projects without question asked. So just to recap, I discussed in the previous slides, we are using a performance and the data-driven approach, and the system safety is incorporated in all projects. Perform driving along with all the directors for prioritizing project to the project sites that play a critical role in the process, that improve the whole communication process and make the whole process a collaborative process. So another important thing I want to discuss is that review process. The review is conducted by our committee from our senior leadership. So during the process, the best practice is identified. Every district gets some feedbacks regarding how to improve their planning and project selection process. And also the performance target is discussed during the process so that the district knows what is expected with their planned project for the next 4 years. Another important thing is administration is reviewing this project selection process, and then also the performance trend. District does put a lot of effort to Q and QC those project information into different systems. So when data comes to us, it is easy for us to gather those information and prepare the TAMP consistent check document. That's all. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Jenny. We'll now hear from William Johnson. William is currently on loan to Federal Highways from the Colorado Department of Transportation, where he normally leads the Performance and Asset Management branch. The Performance and Asset Management branch is responsible for CDOT's performance measures and asset management programs by providing tools to effectively measure, analyze, forecast, and communicate to staff and stakeholders the performance of Colorado's transportation programs, processes, and investment decisions. Recently hitting the 20-year mark with CDOT, William previously served as GIS Data Management Section Manager and Mobility Planner at the Colorado DOT. William.
Hey, thanks, Yana. And I just want to say that any point in time that I drop out or my voice gets slower, just let me know and I'll start this shouting. Want to recognize that, the previous presentations, Tim, I didn't realize that you've been around since we were dealing with rutting from stone wheels. So great job there. And I do have one slide in here from the previous presentation that looks very similar in terms of how things are developed through different stages. And also, Tim, I want to recognize, thanks for pointing out Colorado and a lot of things, and specifically performance. And that's really where my presentation starts off, is what you're looking at here roughly is what we refer to as the performance management landscape in Colorado. And it goes everywhere from our top priorities, which is not the federal priorities, it's our governor's priorities, down to the things that we use day in, day out to make decisions. Two things that I want to point out with in relationship to what we're talking about here, asset management and STIP integration, are the national performance measures, which we have as tier 2 here, and also something called Policy Directive 14. Naturally, the national performance measures, we're talking about PM1, PM2, but as you'll see in further slides, we have to talk about alignment and integration a lot of times when it comes to those other performance measures, and I hope to illustrate that with some of the future slides here. The other thing I want to talk about is Policy Directive 14. This is our Transportation Commission's policy on investment decisions, and it contains the performance measures and targets that the department uses to try to strive for. And strive for, it's in the sense of a rolling 10 years. So first area of alignment is our TAMPs. When it comes to the financial plan, we're looking at 10 years. When it comes to Policy Directive 14, we're also looking at 10 years in terms of how we make investment decisions. Now, when we look at asset management, and this is just a rough modeling of the things that we consider in terms of, well, what do we need? And so naturally the STIP, the requirement from the feds is that you do 4 years, and that becomes your program of projects. What we did here last year is we were really looking at how do we model further than that? How do we get to a 10-year plan that could then morph into a 4-year program of projects? And so with asset management, it's very easy for us to look at, well, what's needed? In Colorado, we have roughly a $2 billion a year funding gap on anything, so we've really focused on asset management. I want to say that normally our budget annually is about $1.6 to $2 million. Roughly $750 to $780 million of that annually goes towards our 12 asset classes. And so really when we're looking at, okay, now that we have this need here that we're looking at, what are the things that are going to get us to our national performance measure targets, to our PD 14 targets? How do we achieve that? And roughly what we look at in terms of how do we define need, we look at, well, what's it like right now? What's the current condition? Then we also have a model, that forecast condition. What's the future going to look like for our 12 asset programs? Then we'll look at what are our treatment strategy options? How much do those cost? We're also building out, just tangentially related, is what does risk and resilience look like in terms of life cycle? Then we also look at, are there major TAM projects? What this means is that if we look at the run-of-the-mill life cycle treatment options, these things would be like your joint replacements, your overlays, your chip seals, or just a camera replacement. Those are things that we normally expect to fund within an asset class for asset management. Now, there are these other things where we have these major TAM projects, and a good example of that is Colorado has the highest tunnel in the nation. Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel cuts through the Continental Divide. And I want to say right now they have an $85 million backlog on essential things that need to be done. It doesn't necessarily mean that the tunnel's unsafe. It just means that, you know, $85 million, if we could spend it right now, we absolutely would. But that kind of falls outside of the scope of life cycle treatment options in the terms of, for us to do asset management effectively, we have to spread that peanut butter really thin across some things and prioritize. However, when it comes to identifying needs on a 10-year plan, we absolutely wanted to identify those major TAM projects. And then we look at maintenance level of service. That's what MLOS stands for. MLS is treated as one of the 12 asset classes when it comes to funding. However, their activities dealing specifically with, you know, traditional maintenance activities are looked at in terms of how do they complement the engineering that goes to the 11 other asset classes. Now, what we look at here, I have the bottom there, needs are a game plan, not a promise list. So when we're looking at a 10-year plan and we start to list these things down, this has probably been the biggest key point, not externally, but internally, that nobody is getting promised or saying that there's an earmark that these things are going to be funded. Now, as I get into future slides here, I'll explain that a little bit better. Further alignment, relationship to the budget. I mentioned asset management, safety, mobility. Now, PM1, PM2, PM3. We did actually make changes to our budget, not necessarily to reflect the federal performance measure areas, but really this is how we break down our business. This is how we break down our budget. It's sort of it's overarching between the budget to how we make decisions for a program to what the STIP looks like, as well as our performance measures. Go over this slide really quickly. The rest of our STIP outside of asset management, we went out and we met all 64 counties in a grassroots effort. They really wanted to bring in a multimodal aspect into what our new STIP as well as long-range plan looked like. They pretty much leveled small projects along with big projects. Again, $2 billion a year shortage. That means that things like capacity are lacking greatly in funds, especially if we put the bulk of our construction funds towards asset management. That's still a need. And then it's really going with that grassroots effort theme, identifying what Coloradans want in terms of a transportation system. It's important to note when we're talking about that grassroots effort for everything except for asset management, it was generally understood by our planning partners that asset management, pointing to the goal that's just below the circle there, that's the data-driven needs assessment process. And the bulk of that will be done internally. However, when you're developing a 10-year list of projects that will then roll into a 4-year STIP, you absolutely want to have that laid out in a way that makes sense for stakeholder input. This roughly just tells the difference in a different way. The stakeholder-heavy process for capital projects, the fiscal constraints based on expected revenue, it's corridor-based. As opposed to asset management, still corridor-based. We still want to inform by outreach, but as I said before, it's built internally. And the fiscal constraint for the needs, we look at doubling the current budget. Now, when we look at that, essentially what this is showing you is our asset investment management system, otherwise known as AIMS, is our asset model. In this, we have 11 different asset classes that can be modeled in here: current condition, future condition, as well as treatment options. Maintenance sort of sits off to the side there. When we get to the data-driven needs, this is really the engine that drives out what do we need to be doing to reach those performance targets. Now, I've been pointed out multiple times that this looks like a virus here. It's not. I actually developed this in April of last year. We recognized that it looked like a virus back then, but here it is. What this is showing you is starting from the left. Here's what 10-year listed needs are. Every one of those blue dots comes out of our asset management system, represents a treatment option. And roughly what this is saying is this is a good investment choice that you have here. Now, as we roll into the program of projects, the things that are circled red, pointing down to the arrow below, those are things that get prioritized. Again, the thing that we had to point out internally was that the things on the 10-year list of needs, not a project list. That's more associated with the program of projects. Those are things that go into our portfolio to be managed, and we fully intend to deliver it. Now, this is a rough diagram of our decision-making process. How does something go from a 10-year list of needs to a program of projects? Here, of course, naturally, we start with performance reporting. What does our current condition look like? Then we have our asset investment management system, AIMS, that will take what's already known on our list of needs under the basic philosophy of once a need, always a need, until we actually do something about it. And then we have heavy coordination between our HQ asset managers and our region coordinators. For us, our regions make the final decision on what the project will be. The project is roughly defined as one or more treatments. And then we have a budget setting workshop where we establish budgets to deliver on some of these prioritizations. And this is just a generalized project selection process. From this, you can see that some things will get selected, some things won't. Those things that do get selected and that we can afford, we'll deliver them and put them down on a STIP. Again, it is very data-driven, very performance-driven process. And for us here, and this is my last slide, Tiana, before you pull out the hook, what we're trying to do is go towards an E-STIP. And this is not just to make it better understood for the public, but to help us understand what we're looking at. Again, a project being one or more treatments. And a treatment could be something from safety, it could be something from a multimodal options fund, it could be something from a Senate bill, and it actually could be something from asset management. For us, looking at this over 10 years, and the regions have to make the decision, what project am I going to bundle multiple treatments in? It's best looked at this through a geographic interface. So you can see, okay, I want to add shoulders to this stretch of pavement, but 3 years down the road, I also have a surface treatment project that's going to occur. Maybe it's more efficient for me to deliver these together. And that's really what our goal is for moving to a different STIP and E-STIP, but also including that long-range plan visioning within a quarter-based view. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, William. You did great on your time management. Okay. We'll now hear from Dave Gardner. Dave is with the Ohio Department of Transportation, where he's the administrator of ODOT's Office of Technical Services. Take it away, Dave.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Get things
Hello,
rolling.
we can hear you, so great.
There we go. Excellent. Good afternoon again. Thank you for having me. To start off with here, let's give a little overview of Ohio's transportation assets. Obviously quite huge. We have approximately $115 billion worth of assets estimated in Ohio, 65 billion of them being the bulk in our pavements area, 22 billion in bridges, 2 billion in culverts, and the remainder in our other assets. Obviously, maintenance is the name of the game for us. Here in Ohio, we have approximately 43,000 miles of road, centerline miles, 14,000 bridges, and close to 80,000 culverts. So pretty significant inventory for us to maintain here. So and needing processes and TAMP implementation is critical for us. So getting them integrated with our STIP, we pretty much consider it inherent as an inherent part of our entire planning process. We have a 4-year STIP, which is updated biannually. We start with our rural consultation meetings, coordinating with our ODOT local agencies throughout the state of Ohio, MPOs, RTPOs. There's numbers of those agencies within the state of Ohio. So there's a lot of coordination. Similar to TxDOT, we're a decentralized department. Rather than 25, where we have 12 district offices within Ohio. And again, all of our districts do all this planning and coordinating with help, obviously, from central office. We utilize a performance-based planning process, utilizing our measures collected and implemented as part of our asset management program. But what we feel where it starts with is with our strategic plan. Starting from executive management and developing that strategic plan, this is where the base of it all begins. And so for us currently, it's improving safety, taking care of what we have, making our system work better, and then enhancing our capacity. So obviously that's a broad picture of where we start. But how do we measure this responsibility? How are we achieving these goals? We do that by utilizing data that we've incorporated with our asset management plan. So this is a quick look at our critical success factors that we've developed for some of our major areas. And so this is just an example of our dashboards that we utilize within ODOT to track where we're at with some of these key areas. If you drill down into, specifically in this case, if you drill down into the pavements area, this is our priority system pavements, and this is an up-to-date look at our dashboard for priority system pavements. Our goals that we've set for this area is an 85 PCR weighted average across the entire state and across all of our roadways in each of the districts. So this was a quick look that I just pulled off of our webpage just this week, and so we're just just above that goal, but in line with where we are with those success factors. So those critical success factors then are implemented as part of or incorporated as part of our district annual work plan process. So each of the districts are required to incorporate and implement those critical success factors. I showed you an example of pavements, but it's also for bridges and culverts or conduits as well. So they're required to report on that. But as part of our district work plan process, we establish our critical success factors. We do our asset inventories and inspections, and you can see I've got a timeline there as far as March and November. We do utilizing our pavement management system. We do our pavement optimizations and make all that information available. We then generate our district allocation funding that is made available to each of the districts. The districts then draft their projects between January and March. The finalization of those projects are within April, which I'm going to show you next, an example of a presentation that each of the districts do for us for executive management annually. So we have a district work plan meeting every year for each of the districts to show, what is going to be produced as far as projects go in each of your districts. How are you complying with these success factors? Are you meeting those goals? And then you can see project delivery, and then obviously we're doing ongoing, monitoring of their areas. So this is an example from a slide presentation given to us by the districts, and you can see there that priority system pavements again have an 85 PCR weighted goal. And in this case, if one of our districts, they had 81.9% compliance over 6 years, but then you can see over their projected years, what they've got planned out for the number of projects. But this is for them to, put together their projects for the year to try to, complete and meet those goals and discuss it as a district to, the department, to their locals on where they're at and what they need to do to produce their projects. I'd mentioned the pavement management system. Again, using pavements as an example, projects are produced utilizing our pavement management process. Once this optimization process has been determined, they're entered into our Ellis system, which is our project planning, management, and accounting software. And this is where the districts enter their information and prepare it for where eventually will be the list of projects that will be used for the STIP. This is just an example of our infrastructure program planning process. In ODOT's case, we concentrate on putting good data into the black box, which includes those PCR targets that I'd mentioned. 2 work plans come out, capital and maintenance. We combine those into one collaborative plan. As we input our data and review black box outputs, we huddle with our districts, our highway techs, double check our assumptions. It's kind of the boots on the ground approach that I've heard some of the others talk about in their presentations. They may know, obviously, being there on the ground, something that we at central office, don't know. So again, all those projects are then entered into our coordinating system, which is Ellis, and this is an example screenshot of where they're entered. Again, the data is then utilized as the foundation for creating that STIP. This is what we call our cradle to grave process, and it may be somewhat difficult for you to see here, but it's basically our workflow for utilizing the asset management process that we have. From the beginning of the asset management process, all of our inventory data, moving through the management systems, through finance, federal reporting, obtaining all of our asset conditions, and then moving through all the budget process, our life cycle planning, performance measures, entering then into our work plans, utilizing our state-of-the-art technology, our then aggressive treatment programs, and then collaborations, which then move us in obviously into construction, and then into our maintenance operations. So obviously there's a lot of critical functions involved with these areas to then put in projects that are utilized within our STIP process. So basically, to summarize here, we're constantly monitoring for continuous improvement, using our critical success factors as our goals, updating those goals or performance targets continuously, identifying our gaps in performance, and then making adjustments to our capital and maintenance programs. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. All right, so, and for our final presentation, we'll hear from Jim Ashman. Jim is the supervisor with the Michigan Department of Transportation. His unit is involved in the development of MDOT's long-range revenue forecasts, the Highway Capital Program, and the evaluation and forecasting of pavement health. He's been with MDOT for over 15 years. Jim.
Thank you. I guess for what I'm going to be presenting will be maybe a little bit of a different take. Michigan's position involving the TAMP and the STIP was more along the lines of integrating those, not just with each other, but also into existing asset management processes that we had going and were required by our own state organizations. So looking at that first, let's take a look at our entire planning and development process, starting all the way at the state long range plan, which is a 25-year look, all the way through the delivery of the program and construction projects. And in between, as you can see, we have the TAMP with a kind of a 10-year look at what our investment plans and strategies will be. Fits in kind of in the beginning. After that, we have a process called the call for projects, where it's literally as it sounds, our central office puts out a call to our 7 MDOT region offices to put together a project list that will be put into the STIP, and also identically or simultaneously, excuse me, into a document in Michigan that we refer to as the 5-year transportation program, which serves a similar role to the STIP, but is reported to our state transportation commission and to the state legislature. And then from there to the program delivery of the projects, and then the cycle repeats itself. To the Transportation Asset Management Plan, the TAMP, obviously it's required by federal law, created and certified. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, felt like it cut out for a second. It's created and certified every 4 years. There's the consistency documentation, which is submitted annually, and the details, the management process for the National Highway System payments and bridge assets. That's just part of what we look at. Obviously, at MDOT, we have other assets that we need to track, but that's what we needed to make sure we included when we integrated the TAMP into our other processes. Moving on to our performance measures and setting of targets that was required through the TAMP process. This was something that was not unfamiliar to us, but it was a little different in that we had never previously, MDOT had only looked at our network in terms of evaluating it either as our entire state trunk line system, the pavements that MDOT owns and operates, or we looked at it separately as networks of freeway and non-freeway. Adding the elements of the national highway system and also the interstate breakouts for that forced us to kind of reevaluate how we were looking at our pavements and our bridges, how we did our planning, and how we went about communicating that to our MPO partners. This graph, or excuse me, this table here kind of represents how we started breaking that out to present to our MPO partners to get feedback and to coordinate with them as we went through the target development process. In developing the TAMP in a way that would fit in our existing asset management practices and structures, we had to accommodate and address certain issues. And part of that was the development of the state of good repair, which was new investment strategies that we had to develop. And again, going back to what I said, the Michigan State Transportation Commission is kind of our oversight body within the state of Michigan. And we chose to, when developing the TAMP in this first round, to keep evaluating at least the state trunk line portions using the remaining service life performance measure, which has been the performance measure that we've used to evaluate our pavements for the commission going all the way back to the mid to late 90s. But what I was hinting at in the previous slide, we did have to break things out, breaking out the interstate and then the non-interstate NHS, and then setting goals and targets for also individually for the non-interstate freeway NHS, the non-freeway NHS payments, and then also within the NHS, there is a portion of the NHS system which is locally owned, and we worked with partners to set up a goal for those as well in terms of state of good repair. So in developing the TAMP strategies, we looked at 4 different ones. The strategy that would achieve the national goals, preserve condition of the pavement, bridge, and assets at current levels, achieving the state of good repair, which I mentioned in the previous slide, and then also a strategy which was constrained to current investment. This actually goes well with the current 5-year program process and STIP process that MDOT has been doing for many years, as it generates a financially constrained strategy from which the other investments plans could be evaluated. And in this, I'm referring to the constrained investment strategy. Doing this, excuse me, allows us to evaluate our plan before we even get to picking projects, in hopes of minimizing the risk, identifying and hopefully eliminating financial gaps, and then managing assets over the course of their whole life. Here's an example of our constrained investment plan. And for the 5-year program / STIP that we use, we have identified things beyond road and bridge preservation that we put into this plan. The goal is to eventually move that integration into the TAMP process as we continue to build that document up as well. And these are graphs that show the condition gaps and the coinciding fiscal gaps between our current investment and our state of good repair. And this is available for us because we have the forecasting tools based on our pavement performance measures to not only do forecasts based on current investment, but also on any hypothetical investment levels that we would like to achieve. In this case, our state of good repair. And we can report in our TAMP document and also to our stakeholders in the legislature, the public, whoever, that we have some rough ideas of how much funding we would need to achieve different goals that we may not currently have the funding for. And this becomes actually a very important messaging tool when we work with our stakeholders to try and get more funding to maintain our pavements. How MDOT implements these plans takes place in what we call our call for projects process. This process is utilized not just for the road and bridge preservation, but also for other areas such as carpool lots, operations, traffic and safety, things of that nature. It's our annual call for for some programs up to 5 years worth of projects. And also this would become the same project list that would become integrated into the STIP as well. So where MDOT is concerned, in a lot of ways, the call for projects and the STIP are almost one and the same in a lot of ways. This slide shows, and it is very colorful and kind of wild. This is our funding allocation formula, where we begin implementing some of how our funding, in terms of divvying the funding between our 7 regions, and how certain weights give certain amounts of funding to them. We have, if you see on some of the columns, or in the column under condition, you'll see TAMP 1, TAMP 2, TAMP 3, TAMP 4. Those are shorthand for identifying that we want a certain percentage of the funding to go to certain regions that have a certain amount of pavement that is in the instance of TAMP Tier 1 is on the interstate. TAMP Tier 2 is on the non-interstate freeway. This is going back to those goals that we identified in the state of good repair and divvying up the money based on what regions need the most help in achieving those goals if they have more fair or poor pavements in those areas. And actually, this is something that we've had to incorporate the TAMP into. This was something, this funding formula existed prior to the TAMP. We added it because we wanted a data-driven way to explain how the money was being divided, so that it wasn't a black box to people, or it wasn't something that was open to any sort of political manipulation. So this has been important for us even before the TAMP, but we added these TAMP elements to it in order to make sure that the goals and the values that we expressed in the TAMP were being reflected into our call for projects and STIP process, in terms of we were actually going to put our money where our mouth was, or our mouth is. And we found that to be very helpful and easy to explain, especially over time as new staff have come and gone at this, both at the central office and at the MDOT 7 regions. Further highlighting our importance that we place based on the TAMP is something that we call strategic direction. MDOT has divided its system, as I mentioned before, into 4 tiers. The interstates being at the top, the non-interstate freeways, non-freeway NHS, and then our non-NHS system. And based on this kind of reversed pyramid, we've put a higher investment and a higher value on our higher volume interstates and freeways, which coincides with the TAMP having and also the TPM having specific goals for the interstate identified as being of more importance overall for state and national economies to support those networks above others. So we have taken that, and that's a further reflection of the importance of those networks that have come out of the TAMP and become involved in our planning and program development process. Finally, the call for projects process ends with the project selection. The projects are reviewed both individually for their merit and as a whole to make sure the projects picked actually allow the higher level strategies which were developed prior to be implemented. And this is done, we, like Ohio, and it sounds like Ohio and Texas do as well. We have a decentralized system. Our 7 regions actually put together the project lists and submit them to central office for review. which is important because they have the most kind of finger on the pulse idea of what the pavement and road networks look like. But the projects are reviewed, to make sure that not only are the individual projects viable, worthwhile projects, but also to make sure, do they meet the goals of our overall planning and investment plan, and going all the way from the TAMP all the way to our state long range plan. And this is the idea that we've gone towards in trying to integrate our entire planning process all the way through into the end goal, or the end result, which is the project selection, where the rubber actually meets the road. At this point, this is where there's a kind of a divergence. Once the project list is finalized, there's what we call a snapshot done of the project list. And basically what this does is kind of puts a hold in place where the projects that we report in the STIP match the projects that we report in the 5-year program that we give to our legislature. So this is a way that we make sure that all of our federally and state required planning and development processes stay in alignment with each other as best as we can. As we know, projects change often and frequently, but at least we put a placeholder at a certain spot that says, we're telling everyone this is what we're doing. And that's been kind of an overarching theme of the entire process, in that MDOT had asset management practices in place for quite a long time. And so our biggest issue was not necessarily involving asset management processes, but how do we adapt what we're doing to accommodate the requirements we were already supposed to provide to certain stakeholders, while also meeting the needs of FHWA and of others. And how do we take those new ideas, new requirements, and improve the process that we were already doing, because there's always room for improvement.
Hey, Jim, if you could wrap it up, that would be great.
Sure, I guess I can wrap it up with this slide. Excuse me. The last part is checking for consistency, and I think that's vital. What good is a plan if you don't follow through with it? Although granted, things can change, as we are all experiencing right now with the effects of the coronavirus, but it's still good to, as best as you can under normal circumstances, go through these checks to make sure that when you actually are implementing and monitoring your program, that it stays at least relatively close to the plan you put in place. And I guess with that, I will wrap it up.
Thanks, Jim. Harlan?
Sure. I want to thank all 5 speakers for giving their perspectives on the integration of TAMP into the planning process. We have some time now to handle some questions. The chat pod can be used to submit questions, or I think we're also going to open up the phone lines, and there is a question that has already been submitted. I'll read this, and the question is for Tim McDowell. And the question is, when the STIP is being developed, how do you limit the additional work that may drive up the project cost and impact the number of miles or square feet that can be addressed?
That's a great question, and that's something all states struggle with, is what I'd call scope creep. One is first you go to the intent of the project. What is the intent of the work? If it's a management type project to address pavement performance or bridge, we've got to take a look at the budget, what's allowed, and then work it from there. Sometimes we do have to add work to it. But in the STIP itself, in the database, we are recording the category, the project limits, i.e. termini, and then following through from there. we have, I guess you call it a process where we are watching the over/under on each project. So when it reaches a certain limit or a percent, then it has to be reviewed by our executive or one of our chief engineers. And then they start asking the questions, why is this overrunning? If it is determined as, hey, it's got to stay in the program, then something has to be moved out in order to continue with fiscal constraint. And then we also have to measure, is this going to negatively impact performance or positively impact? I know that's not a very detailed answer, but each state has their own process, and that's pretty much how Wyoming does it.
I have some questions
Great.
for
Thank you, Tim.
Harlan, I have some questions for the panel.
Yes.
So one question is for all of you, if do any of you have a place in your process where you combine multiple asset needs, meaning, you know, at a minimum pavement and bridge needs or other ancillary asset needs to compose a project that addresses the various needs?
Hey, Hannah, this is William. The last slide that I showed, as well as one before, I was talking about how a project consists of one or more treatments, and that that's that dynamic between the HQ asset manager, or in the case of safety or mobility, the person responsible for the performance of that particular area. They work with a region staff, and it's really the regions who bring in different components of treatments and say, here is my delivery mechanism. That delivery mechanism is the project. So that's inherent within the process for Colorado, that needs to occur for a project to actually get scoped and STIPed and in the future delivered.
This is Jim.
Go ahead.
This is Jim Ashman at Michigan DOT. We also kind of address that in the project selection process. We call it a corridor-based approach, where if there's a particular project, let's say it's pavement project that a region is looking to scope and to program, we would be asking them to look at and address other assets along that route, whether it's signage, traffic and safety issues like guardrail, culverts, if there's bridge replacements along that route as well. So it's not necessarily in our documentation in terms of network level discussions like our TAMP document per se, but there is definitely conversations about doing that when we're actually programming the projects.
This is Jenny Lee from TxDOT. What our process to really scope the project to combine all the different aspects really happens in the portion, the boots on the ground. As I presented in our process, and then we do have a candidate project list starting every fiscal years from different planning office, and also to address like mobility, congestion, the safety, and maintenance, and other preservation needs. And when the district compile the list together, they normally align, say, the physical years, what are those scope? But that's more like an individual office effort. The van, the boot on the ground, the boots on the ground effort, that really bring everybody together in one place. They will go look at those projects together. That's where when they start discuss, what need to be done for the different aspects, whether safety need to be addressed, whether that's a payment need to be addressed, a bridge or culvert, all those things they will discuss. A lot of time it happens is one of the project scope can be expanded some of the project will be moved because there's some other project plan. Maybe instead of in year one doing certain maintenance project, there's maybe mobility project scheduled in the year 3. So instead of doing 2 separate projects, those 2 can be combined. So that way the whole project is become like 1 instead of 2 separate projects, and the money be spent more effectively. A lot of times we found the scoping is very important, especially on the payment part, because the payment drives the total project cost. We trying to do here is we trying to push the selection of the project to the early on of the project selection. So that way, the more depths of payment evaluation, like non-destructive testing, can be done like early on before the scope is finalized, so we get a better estimate of the entire project cost, and anything along the line need to be changed, get finalized, and before that even goes to the final STIP. So it works out really great. It takes a good communication and to get the scope correctly and get all the elements into that project together.
And I'd just say for Wyoming, very similar to the other processes, we have to be very careful what other elements we put in. We may defer some of the assets to a future project so we don't end up with scope creep. The only addition I would add is we have the ability to track each asset in each project, even multiple assets. That way we can make sure we have it all tracked and traced.
Harlan, back to you. And I think if the presenters are willing to stay a little longer, maybe we'll do an extra 5 minutes so we can answer all the questions.
Okay, sure. Other questions that are out there, the chat pod's open. If not, I have a question also. And my question is, with the expansion of the NHS, we have quite a bit of NHS miles now that are off the state system that local governments are controlling. And my question is, as you put your TAMPs together, how do you do the data collection for the off the state system NHS? And also, how does the projects get funding? Are you funding it or giving money to the local governments, or are they doing it on their own to try to help achieve performance target achievement?
Yeah. This is William. The first question is data collection. CDOT's been collecting data for the off-system NHS for quite some time. So we've maintained doing the full data collection across the NHS, both off-system and on-system, through the performance measures. When it comes to funding, no, there's been no promise to push any additional funding towards off-system or local-owned NHS. With that.
Yeah, thank you, William. Appreciate that. And any others have a perspective on that? Is it an issue? Yeah.
Jim Ashman with MDOT again. We also have do our data collection on the non-state-owned NHS system. In addition, there is data that is collected through the Michigan Transportation Asset Management Council, which is a statewide organization that was developed, I want to say about 15 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, that was designed to coordinate a lot of asset management activities across the state of Michigan, not just with MDOT, but with all 617 transportation agencies across the state. So there is some coordination in terms of the various data collection that goes on the NHS system and on the federal aid system as a whole. However, in terms of additional funding to locals, again, there is certain distributions, but not anything that's coming from the DOT share.
Okay, great, thank you.
Harlan, there are questions in the questions box now if you want to walk through those.
Okay, you know what? I don't actually have access to the questions panel.
Oh, okay, all right, I'll read them.
Okay.
Okay, so how does one go, so this question is from John Lewis. How does one go from the asset management system, often very discrete level of analysis, asset description, through to the STIP, where one is essentially dealing with a much higher level of analysis at the projects level? Who wants to take that on?
This is Dave Gardner. I can start that. I had talked about our pavement management system, and the pavement management system utilizes the PCR data that's collected as part of the asset management program. And so once the optimization is done utilizing the pavement management system, those projects are then made available to the districts in which they can choose from as part of their selections into their annual work plans. So those projects then in turn, as they're approved, are then implemented as part of the STIP program. So that's basically from the detailed data, you know, to the finished selected project.
This is Tim, Wyoming. A very same thing. We leave the detailed analysis to the experts, and it's rolled up to a candidate list. The big issue we had to do is prove to the districts that it was not a black box magic scheme, but we were actually using data that comes from their districts, and we made believers out of them that way, and now they communicate a lot. But that's how it rolls up in STIP, just similar to what David said.
All right. Another question. How do the state DOTs distribute and allocate the state and federal funds to the MPOs and local governments for their pavement projects? Is there a specific formula, or is it based on the lane miles? Let's just have two presenters respond, and then we can move on to the other questions.
Well, Jim Ashman again. I showed that formula for the distribution of our reconstruction and rehabilitation funds, our road R&R funds, and that was not specifically to MPOs or locals or municipalities. That was to our 7 MDOT regions, but within the MDOT regions, there is no official formula per se, but they work with the local MPOs in those areas to determine, that's part of their project selection process, is allocating those funds.
Hey, this is William. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but that's not going to stop me from giving an answer. We don't. There's no formula specific to like pavement or bridge. There's no real distribution of funds to MPOs from the state for asset management. However, you know, based on our Policy Directive 14, that covers the full system, not just NHS. And should a project happen on a state road within an MPO boundary, of course, once that's identified and prioritized as something we're going to put into our STIP, naturally it would have to appear on the MPO STIP.
Thank you. Another question. Do other state STIPs include all improvement types and all funding types, including state-only funded projects? Let's also hear from two states on that.
For Wyoming, the answer would be yes. We do include all the projects in our STIP document that goes out to the public. So hopefully that answers that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anybody else?
This is Jenny Lee from Texas. Yes, our STIP also include everything from payment to mobility, safety, and others.
Mm-hmm. All right, here is another question. It sounds as if you develop a project with the STIP in mind, or do you develop the STIP with projects as prioritized by the state based on targets? Can anyone respond to that question?
This is Jenny Lee from Texas. I'll give it a try. I will say this for the STIP. You see the whole process. We actually not just start from a STIP. We actually start from a long-range plan and go to the 10-year UTP and then move on to the STIP. So before we actually move to the STIP, and we already identify some of the priorities, and we have our goal in mind to start even with long range and the 10 years UTP. When we move to the STIP, we kind of already have some idea regarding what kind of a project are needed to be able to meet our performance targets. Those projects selected are kind of committed in the way, but we do make adjustments for every year to address the changes to either the network or the issues come up like energy sector in the certain area, or maybe the locals with the logging industry that cause additional damage to the payment, and don't get adjusted during the STIP phase.
Thanks, Jenny. The next comment and question is from Derek Constable. The MDOT presentation showed a pavement state of good repair goal that changes in time. This is an interesting approach. How is that determined? Jim?
That isn't necessarily that those two graphs did not show that the goal changes in time. Per se, that was just a forecast of showing what it would take to achieve the end goal, and then the period of time we thought it would take to achieve those condition goals. So sorry for the confusion on that.
All right, thanks, Jim. The next question is from Danielle Graves, and she's following up on my original question and asks, how then do you attribute the investment of a project addressing multiple asset objectives to an FHWA work type? What bucket of funding is the project attributed to? Who wants to take that on?
I'll try that on it. We actually have created an improvement code crosswalk table where we're able to pull the intent of the work. Again, it comes back to what is the intent of what you're doing. And then based on those categories, we can actually have multiple FHWA improvement codes per project. And then we tie it that way. Because now you're talking about work type going into budgetary improvement codes, etc. But that's how we do it in Wyoming. Each state is probably going to have their own way of doing it, but that's our attempt at it.
All right, thanks, Tim. And the final question is from Harjit Bal, and it is, how often do the STIP changes historical are aligned with all asset management system needs? Okay, let's see.
Could you read that question one more time?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the question. So it's how often are the STIP changes that are the historical STIP changes aligned with the asset management needs? So I think the question is, your asset management systems give you needs, and then your STIP is evolving over time, and how often are you looking at aligning the two different sources of information and seeing how they align?
If I look at this from the Plan, Do, Check, Act, or is it Act, Check? It's one of those. The typical change management evaluation model is the rough requirement is when we're required to submit the information for determination of significant progress. A more general answer from the Colorado perspective is that every year we're looking back at not just what is in the STIP, but what has been delivered. Delivered being it's open, it's operating. You may not have the funds fully expended, and if that happens, it will still be on the STIP. But we're evaluating everything that we put money into, trying to walk it back from your expenditures to what was on the STIP to, as Tim said, many projects are a patchwork quilt of different funding types. And so we're always trying to work to disassemble the sum of the whole into what was the original treatment from what asset class or from what performance area. That's just a continuous activity where it seems like monthly somebody's asking a question, either from our Transportation Commission or Governor's Office or our executive management. And so it's just a cyclical basis.
Thanks, William. All right, so let's thank you, everybody. Our next webinar will be held in 2 months on August 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our topic will be TAM communication and visualization. You can also see the future topics that is scheduled for the webinar series, and you can go to the link that's on this slide and sign up for each one of them as of today. So you can just go and do that. So and also please send ideas. As we mentioned earlier, the series is every 2 months, and so there will be more in the future months. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again to all of the participants in today's webinar. Bye-bye. Thank you for sticking around for the extra time. I think the content in the last 2 webinars have been important, and I think we've had a lot of questions as a result. Thank you. Bye-bye.